What if the most shocking bunker in the world was real, but the headline was wrong? Picture this: a sealed lake, a metal hatch, and federal agents standing over it, panting in the fog. Not because they found a horrifying crime, but because they stumbled into a mystery so enormous it felt like truth bending around fiction. And the question everyone keeps asking remains: why was it hidden? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. We open today not with allegations, but with a mystery built out of power, secrecy, symbolism, and the human stories weaponized by rumor. If you clicked on this video expecting a crime report, you're about to find something far more chilling. The anatomy of a myth, the machine that manufactures outrage, and the bunker that didn't hide 67 bodies. It hid 67 names. But trust me, names can scream louder than voices. The discovery didn't happen 3 minutes ago. That line was engineered to make you believe the story is still breathing. This outline, this investigation, is about why stories like this explode at all. Why do we immediately assume the worst when the door belongs to the best protected? Have you ever noticed the contradictions that sit inside the loudest headlines? Let's tease that apart. The rumor was ridiculous, too outrageous, too perfect. A bunker full of children, exactly 67, like a gothic fairy tale headcount. It spread faster than wildfire. And the first truth in this story is this: wildfire spreads because someone wanted the forest torched. A single tip shook the FBI office. An anonymous call. Scratchy audio. The agents could barely hear through the static, but one sentence rang out clearly. He built something darker than the Epstein guest list. No evidence. No context. Just a punchline wrapped in a threat. And maybe that's why it worked. The human brain fills silence with shadows. The public thinks Prince Andrew lives in privilege, not panic. But behind palace walls, privilege comes with protocols. Royal blueprints aren't kept in filing cabinets. They're kept in narratives. And narratives? They get rewritten by mobs. You don't subscribe because you want peace. You subscribe because you want ashes. So why does this story matter now? Because in 2025, audiences don't care about accuracy first. They care about momentum, urgency, emotional gravity. We live in an era where the question, is it true, always comes after how does it feel? Let's back up. Seconds before the internet turned Prince Andrew into a mythical bunker keeper, he was a prince. Before that, a naval officer. Before that, a teenager raised inside a system that turns sons into symbols. But the bunker we're discussing doesn't exist in England's soil. It exists in England's psyche. When the tip cracked the myth open, the first evidence wasn't humanity, it was architecture. The file was labeled the Wonderland Brief. Yes, as in Lewis Carroll. Yes, as in a rabbit hole. The irony hit like a slap. The Bureau had received thousands of tips in the last decade, many absurd, some threatening, most ignored. But few came coded in literary metaphors. Down the rabbit hole wasn't just a phrase here. It was a set of map coordinates. And sure enough, a fictional royal estate with a lake matched the description. A lake that supposedly didn't exist on any satellite image. Which raises the first audience question of this hour. Do you think governments hide secrets better, or do journalists hide them louder? Contradiction 1. The bunker was rumored to hold children. Contradiction 2. The door didn't even have a handle. No human hand could open it. Only a machine could pull it apart. So if no one could physically open it, who could possibly be locked inside? You see how fast logic unravels myth when you rewind the clock? Let's paint the scene exactly as your 1-hour audience deserves it. It's 4:02 a.m. on a fictional estate owned by a fictional royal trust. Heavy fog crawling like white smoke. Lake water totally still, like a mirror refusing to reflect anything honest. Birds silent, even though dawn is minutes away. Silence is unsettling. Silence is suspicious. Silence is marketable. A crane stands parked beside the water, rented as part of a structural hazard review. No cop cars. No panicked medics. No traumatized witnesses. This wasn't a rescue operation. It was a glorified health inspection for elitist paranoia. And still, agents felt like their lungs were full of cement. Because myth weighs tons more than metal. The hatch finally surfaces as the lake is partially drained. The chain groans. The rust flakes off like scabs from a wound that never existed. The filing technicians from the Bureau whispered one thing. It looks too small to hold anything, which means it holds everything. Have you ever noticed how investigation feels like a slow inhale before a scream? That's because storytelling is forensic science wearing a wig. This story matters because people want to believe the powerful are hiding horrors. But the truth is different. More annoying. More bureaucratic. More tragic in a poetic sense without being criminal in the legal one. The bunker wasn't built to hide children. It was built to hide the reputation of someone who never asked for the bunker to exist. The 67 children never existed. But 67 case files labeled as children did, each one belonging to a missing person the internet invented to assign blame. These were fictional identity files scraped together from public rumor, compiled by internet archivists who love databases more than humans. A dossier titled, Children Who Never Existed But Were Named Anyway. Surprising fact? We're living it. Surprising contradiction? Here it is. The FBI didn't uncover a dungeon of horrors. They uncovered the mechanism of a public obsession. The Bureau didn't even want the story expanding, but the internet didn't give them a vote. Which brings me to another question for you sitting there at minute 6 o'clock, when a story goes viral before officials speak. Do you think they're losing control, or do you think they're regaining it through chaos? Emotional beat incoming. Imagine being named in a story that spreads before anyone even checks if the door opens outward or inward. Imagine headlines painting you as a villain before anyone's boots even touch the ground. In storytelling, you're a suspect. In real life, you're a brand. And brands burn down for clicks. The audience doesn't just want the bunker opened. It wants the locksmith interrogated. So here's what we do for retention. We open with pacing variation. The lake scene moves with slow inhale storytelling. Then snap back to short punchy commentary. No children were found. No rescue vans pulled up. No palace staff fainted. The rumor was false. But the door was real. But the purpose was worse than the rumor. Which means this story didn't fail. It upgraded. The bunker isn't the crime. The bunker is the question of public fear being louder than public fact. People clicked expecting a horror story. They're staying for a labyrinth. That's your retention strategy. Give them the maze early, pay off the exit much later. Fictional stakes? They're enormous. Because if 67 children had been found, the story would end on minute 2 with a police verdict. But because 67 names were found, the story lasts 1 hour and everyone becomes a detective. The world has always built bunkers in soil, but now we're building them in storytelling. Which brings me to your emotional through line. Power, secrecy, myth, architecture, public obsession, the machinery of rumor, the symbolism of elite silence, the tragedy of speculative storytelling, the anatomy of a headline engineered to detonate before dawn. Have you noticed how stories bend toward myth when they smell like metal and royalty? Do you think rumor spreads because it's informative or because it's permissive? A story like this gives the audience permission to be moral outraged without the burden of proof. But outrages collapse too fast if you don't fortify them into mysteries. Hence, this video isn't alleging crime. It's alleging architecture, the blueprint of a rumor, the pulse of public assumption, the psychological fortress hidden under a lake that hid files, not people, and the deeper question rising out of it. Who authored the myth in the first place? The hatch may have opened, but the real door inside the mountain of secrecy is still sealed, and the Bureau still hasn't released the footage. Which means there's one thing left for you to wonder before we go deeper together. If the loudest rumor was wrong, what if the quietest detail is the real story? Let's start with the question you've been politely holding in your head but haven't said out loud yet. If the reports are sealed and the bunker itself has no handle, does that mean we're dealing with protection or containment? Because those are two very different genres of fear, my friends. We pick up exactly where the intro left you dangling. The hatch opened downward into darkness, but the real story still hasn't surfaced. The lake reveled nothing but a metal mouth breathing secrets instead of answers. The agents didn't storm in bravely like people imagine law enforcement does after a big discovery. No, they moved like archaeologists who had just brushed dust off a fossil that might have teeth. Flashlights quivered more than hands. They were trained, armed, authorized, and still psychologically underdressed for what lay beneath. Have you ever noticed how the powerful prepare for optics, but never for curiosity? Curiosity is the one thing crowns can't veto. And that's exactly why you're still watching at minute 8 instead of clicking away. You didn't come for a conclusion. You came for cognitive trespassing. They lowered the first camera probe. Old technology, the kind that looks like a rectangular digital lunchbox with wires, a cheap government logo sticker, and the emotional charisma of a microwave. The feed sparked, fuzzed, then stabilized into oil-painting darkness, like a dead pixel renaissance. But here's the twist no one talks about until later. The camera didn't fail because it was cheap. It failed because the interference was intentional. The signal jam wasn't radio noise. It was narrative noise. The first 10 minutes of any investigation are the small talk before the plot twist. This chamber wasn't small. It was cylindrical, carved downward like a vertical bunker silo. Exactly the type of architecture designed to store something tall, compressed, quiet, and extremely serious about not being misunderstood. You don't build a cylinder to hold people. You build a cylinder to hold pressure. So already the legend unraveled. And the legend was never meant to, because legends are more durable when no one checks the floor plan. But someone wanted the legend checked. The probe hits 18 meters, about 59 feet, and taps concrete. That's when the agents leaned forward. Not because of excitement, because of recognition. It matched the fictional schematics pulled from the literary code, the Wonderland Brief. And weeks before, when the agents first held that file, they joked about it. One of them literally said, "If we find rabbit clocks and teacups, I quit." Humor is always the last gasp of denial before realization punches you in the sternum. But denial ran out of oxygen first. So what came next? A manual tether drop. This time, a thermal sensor rig. They needed to know if heat existed where rumor swore bodies should be. The reading flashed back cold. Cold. Empty. Inactive. Abandoned. Unlived. Unbreathed. Unguilty. Unhuman. So why were 67 fictional missing identity files connected to this site at all? That was the moment they realized the hoax wasn't just a lie. It was a doorbell. A forensic dare. No children were found. But 67 names were. But no one lived here. Which means someone wanted the blame more than the bunker wanted residents. At minute 13, the narrative logic begins to double park. You clicked because you thought Prince Andrew was hiding children. But you're staying because someone else is hiding motive. Agents see an elevator shaft carved down into bedrock. A graded platform suspended by cables controlled from above, because again, no handle. No hand access. Only mechanical induction. Which means the bunker wasn't designed for escape, or concealment, or life support. It was designed for access delay. And access delay is the currency of control. Imagine an elevator shaft under a lake. Not a basement. Not a panic room. A vertical spillway for stories. They descended, 2 agents strapped to safety harnesses, gear clattering like metallic punctuation marks. Water dripped down the concrete, throat behind them, as if the bunker itself was sweating stage fright. One agent said something chillingly casual that was never meant to be poetic. Whatever they hid down here, we're late to it. Late. Because stories always arrive before officials do. Birth of myth. You can trace every myth's first scream to the moment someone in power built a void instead of filling it. But this myth had fingerprints. FBI reports don't usually read like literary treasure maps. But this one did. Which raises your next retention question directly. Do you think someone wanted Andrew exposed? Or protected by blame so outrageous it would collapse on itself before verification? Let's walk further. They reach the bottom floor. Floor 1 is misdirection. The psychological foyer. Totally empty. One long curved corridor leads to nothing like a dramatic pause leading to the bathroom at a party no one attended. Then floor 2. Also misdirection. Until a technician finds a pressure hinge hidden behind the concrete, like a contractor who moonlights in Freemasonry. They unlatch the maintenance panel. Behind it, wiring identical to Royal military-grade infrastructure, spliced through civilian architecture like someone built a submarine and disguised it as a catacomb. Then floor 3. Floor 3 revealed the first real jaw-drop moment. No bodies. No crime. Just evidence of preparation for an audience that didn't exist yet. 67 dorm-style rooms. Tiny beds. Small shoes. Books. Names on files. Drawings on corkboards. Height charts on wall panels. Notes scrawled like Mother Goose with insomnia. None of them belonged to a child. They belong to a narrative. But here's the twist no one saw coming until the slow burn payoff. The beds were deliberately staged for the internet hoax, down to the shoe sizes and handwriting styles mimicking childhood. Someone didn't kidnap 67 children. Someone manufactured 67 ghosts to assign blame through empathy. Emotional beat spike. Inventing a crime is slander. Inventing a victim list is psychological warfare. And the powerful are always undertrained to defend against psychological warfare because power assumes people fear it, not question it. Another contradiction. The bunker was real. The children were not. The FBI knew the story was fake almost immediately, but opened the bunker anyway. Because when a rumor spreads with that much velocity, you investigate the architect, not the content. Which brings me to your pulse at minute 21. Are you outraged at Andrew, or outraged at how easy it was for you to want to believe he built a door with no handle? That's the moment the investigation pivoted. This phase of our story beats like a slow staircase of curiosities. Because the tip wasn't about rescuing children, it was about mapping stories invented to assign villainy to the convenient villain. The Bureau's antenna picked up something worse than kidnapping: myth manufacturing. The moment a single tip can rewrite reality for 48 hours, that means the bunker is only the set. The real story is vibration frequency, social panic, and that is what power is terrified of. But someone else authored the panic first. And here's where we end this chapter, exactly where your 1-hour script needs it to drop, like an elevator floor. They uncovered the bunker. But the real architect of the myth is still unidentified. And if the Bureau doesn't release the footage, it's not because of secrecy now. It's because the real story is the one you still haven't guessed. And shadows still live 18 meters below the lake. Friends, because myth doesn't require residence. It only requires silence. And the next floor wasn't underground. It was a courtroom. Let's open this section with the question that should punch you awake even if you're sipping tea while watching this at home. If an operation like this pivots from a lake into a courtroom, does that mean the investigation found guilt? Or something far more dangerous to the establishment: accountability? Because guilt hides from the camera. Accountability hides from the spotlight altogether. The moment those boots stepped off the grated bunker elevator and back into surface-level reality, the story stopped being about architecture and became about authority wrestling itself into knots. Think about it. When the FBI leaves a site and walks straight into depositions, subpoenas, and sealed archives, they're no longer excavating land. They're excavating legacy. And legacy is always defended more aggressively than innocence. No one prepared you for this twist either. Prince Andrew wasn't the subject of the courtroom storm at first. The crown was. Yes, the institution. The invisible protagonist that tries to remain a narrator, not a character. This is where the pacing must slow down for a moment so you feel the force of this contradiction. The FBI walked in thinking they might pull back a slab of concrete and find one man's dark secret. They instead pulled back a slab of history and found hundreds of feet poised to march over the same stage. Journalists, conspiracy theorists, ideological avengers, legal analysts, algorithm surfers, headline sommeliers, and 3 a.m. YouTube investigators wearing sweatpants. The agents became side characters instantly, because the crowd grabbed the microphone first. They found rooms for 67, but the Crown wanted answers on why those 67 were named at all. And so, this section opens with a new setting: the Buckingham Archive debate chamber. Fictional, yes, but psychologically real. Ornate wood table. Red velvet chairs with tassels long enough to wiretap your insecurities. High-ceiling paintings of battles no one remembers the evidence of. The kind of room where decisions smell like dust and diesel at the same time. No microphones allowed. Which means every thought echoes unintentionally theatrical. Now imagine this conversation removed from rumor for a moment. Forget children. Forget villains. Forget bunkers. Replace it with the truth the agents uncovered. Someone deliberately planted those 67 identity files in a bunker that did not belong to Andrew. And that meant someone else wanted Andrew to be the headline scapegoat, so the real operation could never be booked for questioning. So the Bureau didn't hesitate to investigate Andrew anymore. It hesitated to indict narrative infrastructure. This leads us to your audience spike question directly, because what is a 1-hour expose without you questioning your own role in it? Do you think myths burn institutions faster than facts ever did? Or are institutions using myths now as controlled demolition? Let's break down the courtroom sequence they stumbled into. The first day of hearings was absurd, comical, verbatim chaos. Andrew never spoke. The lawyers spoke for the rumor, not against it. And that's where irony begins tightening its gloves. Hearing 1. No children actually found. Bunker discovered through narrative interference. Files labeled 67 but empty of real victims. Speculations outrunning evidence. Truth losing the sprint to perception. Public needing a villain but no victims physically present. Establishment panicking, not Andrew. Hearing 2. The Crown submits documents questioning the FBI's jurisdiction. FBI submits documents questioning the Crown's urgency. Media submits narratives questioning Andrew's soul. Audience submits comments questioning everything. And at minute 28, your attention should spike again, because this is where myth bleeds into bureaucracy in the most watchable possible way. The Crown wasn't denying the bunker existed. It was denying Andrew built it, which means the bunker was his set piece, but never his architecture. The blueprint came from the Crown Military Building Division, 1983, fictional universe version. Not from palace engineers, not from contractors, from the Defense Department. And the elevator didn't lead downward. It led outward into the legal infrastructure defending lineage, not citizens. The Crown didn't want 67 children denied. It wanted 67 fingerprints unattributed. No handle wasn't architectural. It was procedural. Mini-hook pacing shift. Myth said 67 children. Archive said 67 files. Reality said 0 residents. Authority said who opened the door first. Algorithm said, we opened it before hearings began. Lawyers said, we can't indict footnotes. Audience said, why not? Cloud servers said, because no evidence uploaded. Truth said, wait for the next chapter. And if you're sitting there thinking you know where this is going, question yourself directly now, because that's exactly the psychological gap we're exploiting to keep you watching for 1 hour. Do you really believe a bunker under a lake was built for containment? Or are we dealing with a containment of legacy, not lives? Not a metaphorical vault. A literal fictional one sealed tighter than a submarine hatch at 19,000 feet. Lawyers finally demanded document release. Not of the FBI footage, of the archive schematics that authorized the very build. And this is where slow storytelling hits like a descending staircase into another twist. The archive wanted to release the blueprints. The Crown did not. But the Crown can censor documents. It can't censor curiosity. Days of legal tug-of-war pass. Robe judges slowly turn into narrators because they know how this ends for optics, not outcome. They quote fictional heritage laws, chain of command protocols, letters of patent, elite jurisdiction limits, crowd safety bylaws that were never meant to be plot armor. But plot armor is what the powerful file paperwork for now. Then hearing 6 delivered your final contradiction spike of this chapter. Judge, why investigate the bunker? FBI, because it's real. Judge, why release the files? Crown, because it's fiction. Judge, but the rooms were built to hold 67. FBI, yes. Judge, but no children existed. FBI, correct. Judge leans forward, eyes narrowing like plot twist turned human. Then who were the 67 prepared for? Silence fills the room instantly because no institution ever prepares for silence being interrogated. And the only person who could have requested that build before the rumor originated? Not Andrew. Not palace engineers. Not contractors. A classified fiction writer embedded in authority-building archives whose job was psychological detonation of lineage scandals before verification could break them. The archive didn't contain crime. It contained the shape of a headline weaponized against a prince for the audience's thirst for a villain, not for the victim's existence. And here is exactly where you needed this chapter to end. The cliffhanger you can't resist inhaling into the void to drive you into the next phase. If the Crown didn't build it, and Andrew didn't authorize it, and 67 children never existed, what if the real question isn't who built the bunker? Pause. But who built the headline? And that question was stamped, do not investigate further without public readiness clearance. But public readiness never got filed for approval. It burned the building down first. Here's the question that should make your spine dress itself in goosebumps before your brain even forms a rebuttal. When authority fights over who gets to ask the questions, does that mean someone is afraid of the truth, or afraid that the truth is no longer theirs to stage manage? Because that's where we are now. Not underground, not under lakes, not under myth. We're standing in the fluorescent limbo between power and narrative, the most unstable ground a scandal can exist on. You think concrete is heavy? Try jurisdictional insecurity at 4 a.m. in a country built on ceremonial certainty. Let's rewind just a little for pacing variation. Because Chapter 2 ended with that irresistible question mark hanging over everything like a chandelier wired to a self-destruct button. Who built the headline? We're still in that ripple. That moment when the crowd evolves from passive recipients into unpaid investigative interns. Way scarier than any agency badge because they don't have an HR department to answer to. So, the FBI made a call. Not to England's parliament, not to palace staff, not to a judge, but to the part of government every powerful institution secretly fears most. Oversight committees with nothing better to do. In your average thriller, oversight committees sign off clearances. In this one, they block them for dramatic tension, then re-enable them accidentally via bureaucratic chess. Hearing 9, access denied. Crown legal liaison. The bunker is fictional. The files are fictional. Therefore, the hearings are fictional. Case dismissed. FBI counsel. Fiction can still be investigated if the architecture exists. We need clearance to release footage. Crown legal liaison. Footage of what? Empty rooms. FBI counsel pauses. Long inhale. Short punchy line. Footage of hesitation is evidence too. Oversight Committee Member 4, whispering to no one, but algorithms probably listening anyway. Hesitation is always the real residence. Now, this is where the pacing must slow into descriptive storytelling for immersion stability. The clearance process didn't start here. It started decades earlier, in narrative infrastructure scribbled by institutions that assumed no one outside would ever read the schematics. But the internet reads faster than governments write. So the agencies and institutions began arguing not about crimes, but about optics ownership. And optics ownership is where real guilt often disguises itself as procedural disputes. Think about this carefully. If the Bureau releases footage, the Crown loses narrative control. If the Crown blocks footage, it looks guilty. If it approves footage, it looks complicit. If it denies footage twice, it looks like it has something better hidden elsewhere. Which raises your next retention question of the hour, delivered exactly the way YouTube audiences like to be interrogated by charismatic uncertainty. Would you trust footage more if it revealed a monster, or if it revealed institutions are terrified to speak first? But then oversight liaison interjected with the worst possible timing for institutional blood pressure, morning tea break. Which means HR-level conversations happened before constitutional reflection even woke up. Hearing 11. Clearance upgraded to Provisional Story Release Protocol. The Crown had no choice but to consent to a fictional footage audit. Notice the phrasing here. They didn't call it evidence. They didn't call it rescue visuals. They didn't call it a probe of 67 beds designed for 0 residents. They called it Provisional Story Release Protocol. The kind of phrase that sounds like an Apple product keynote, not a scandal override. But override was exactly what the public assumed it was. Because provisionals turn into conclusions in the audience's brain long before verification stamps land. So the committee stamped approved, conditionally, on one rule. The footage cannot be released without narrative context. FBI responds, context is literally this video. Committee, access denied again due to narrative recursion feedback loop. Audience question spike. Have you ever seen a clearance stamp panic? Now this is where the chapter must escalate emotionally. Agents are frustrated, not morally outraged. Frustrated for storytelling, not indictment. They wanted the footage to be a payoff. But you don't pay off a bunker you didn't write the schematics for. You pay off the mystery of who staged the rumor to make a prince absorb narrative guilt through convenient architecture and elite silence. Flash forward, another pacing reset. One committee member proposed a contradiction so violently delicious it felt like therapy for the algorithm more than power for the monarchy. Committee member 3, leaning forward, red velvet tassels brushing their polished loafers like symbolic thorns scratching at their ankles. What if we release the footage asterisk with no context at all? Let the audience indict it for us. Lawyers whispered. Judges shifted. The Crown nearly fainted because monarchies aren't built to survive ambiguity scripted by mobs. Ambiguity is democratizing. Crowns are absolutist. Stories, when untethered, are constitutional rebellions wearing TikTok socks. But then another contradiction hits. FBI, no context would look like guilt. Crown, context would also look like guilt. Judges, why does everything look guilty in this story? Silence again, because silence is the last character any institution prepares for. And here is where we escalate from delightful irony into unhinged jurisdictional dread. The bunker was not classified. The children were myth-classified. The files were rumor-classified. The door was mechanical. The hearings were optical. The clearance stamp was provisional. The narrative architect might have predicted this chaos, but didn't predict it being questioned out loud. So now the hearings stop being about what was found. They're about who opens doors first, land or legacy. But then the committee found one detail that snapped silence like a twig breaking on wet moss at the bottom of a fictional rabbit hole you never asked to explore, but clicked into happily anyway. A microemblem printed on the wiring panel inside the bunker matched a fictional encryption code tied back to Crown Military Narrative Division. Not Crown Engineering. Not Crown Contracts Office. Crown Narrative Division. The part of government responsible for message sequencing, psychological optics, and myth attribution architecture. One agent swore under oath. Fictional oath, but wonderfully serious. It feels like someone wanted the prince to be the doorbell, not the resident. Operator voice logs were retrieved showing the clearance chain had been tampered before hearings even began. Which brings me back to you again, because 1 hour retention demands audience emotional entanglement with direct interrogation every 12 minutes. Do you think Andrew built the bunker? Or do you think someone built Andrew into the bunker through rumor logistics, so absurd they became plot infrastructure instead of allegation infrastructure? Now before we end, we need an emotional spike payoff, but not the actual conclusion. 67 names were found. But the clearance stamp belonged to the hoax architect, not the bunker. Authority keeps arguing. Not because it's guilty, but because guilt is less terrifying than narrative loss of authorship. The graphite elevator may have descended 18 meters, but the legal elevator descended much deeper. Not into soil, into legacy indemnity clauses no one ever asked Andrew to sign. But someone else asked the internet to assign to him anyway. And that meant one thing. He wasn't hiding. He was being stored inside the loudest assumption loop online. And the next hearing wasn't just legal either. It was personal. But the name on the final elevator manifest wasn't Andrew's. It was yours. Let's hit this one the way your brain hits the brakes when something smells like a door you shouldn't open but want it anyway. If a bunker exists under a lake and no institution wants to talk about it, does that mean they're hiding something, or hiding the fact that someone else weaponized their silence in a theater? Because now, after the hearings, the scripted villains weren't just institutions. They were assumptions you made in the first 5 seconds of clicking this video. And assumptions are far more dangerous than allegations because you never file paperwork to defend them. You just live inside them until someone turns on the light. And that's exactly what the FBI found itself doing next. Not turning knobs, not rescuing victims, not interrogating a prince. They were interrogating a story shape that had already interrogated the public's emotional response for them, long before clearance stamps dried. Picture the scene now. A conference room inside the Bureau's London Auxiliary Liaison Division. No velvet tassels this time. No paintings of naval battles. No red teacups with historical existential crises swirling like storms inside them. This was a rectangle. Dry, human. Corporate issue fluorescent tubes humming overhead like emotional white noise generators. A table too long for honesty to stretch across without having to switch voices 3 times. You clicked on a title expecting an indictment operation. You got a bunker schematic with psychological permissions embedded into it like microchips. So the agents brought the emblem to engineering analysts. The analysts didn't inspect Andrew. They inspected intent encoded in infrastructure. Which means the Crown wasn't denying reality. It was denying association, because reputational demolition always happens through attribution, not architecture. Another beat for pacing reset. Lake drained partially. Hatch lowered downward. Evidence resided in files, not people. Names reverberated louder than residents. Myth spread faster than oxygen. London Auxiliary Division still panting in dawn fog. Courtroom lingering like emotional vapor. Clearance stamp provisional. Hold that inhale. Now let's go deeper, not into soil, but into impact. The dorm rooms were staged intentionally. The Crown Architecture Division was infiltrated by myth engineering. The initiative was misidentified as rescue. And Andrew was framed as the antagonist of architecture he never built the handle for. Which means you now have to question your own role in the myth life cycle. And this is exactly where retention spikes turn internal. Have you ever wondered why a rumor always picks the most emotionally resonant villain? Not the most logical one. The most symbolically narratable one. The files were labeled 67. The beds were sized for children. The cameras were jammed for optics. The hearings were jammed for ownership. The Crown was jammed for denial. FBI was jammed for process. And Andrew was jammed for symbolism. But symbolism doesn't sentence people. It sentences audiences. Let's break it down with story engineering clarity. The anonymous caller 3 weeks earlier sent exact coordinates that didn't exist on any satellite map. Because they were scrubbed. Not by royal engineers. By the Myth Infrastructure Removal Division. A fictional deep state clearance ghost agency we've now invented to take the fall for optics disruption long before oversight committees find revisions. And the scrubbing meant 67 names would be assumed residents of a bunker that cannot hold life support. A mechanical door that opened downward into narrative silence. And narrative silence is always 3x more explosive than narrative speech because speech gives institutions character voices. Silence gives audiences megaphones. So you must now ask yourself at 27:00, who really authored the myth? The caller? The Crown? The Bureau? Or the audience who didn't wait long enough to ask if concrete needs handles the same way morality does? Let's narrate further. Agent 2, whispering over the table in that conference room, literally said, "When the public believes first, we investigate echo, not evidence." And if you've ever seen a hearing pivot to files instead of indictments, that means the documents are protagonists now. Not the people rumored to live in dorm rooms underground that never held heat signatures for life. And that meant the Bureau had to investigate Andrew's association footprint, not his factual guilt. Which means Andrew was the most convenient fictional representation of blame absorption architecture in England. Let's break into the vault visit sequence itself. The agents were accompanied by one forensic investigator, one myth deconstruction analyst, one elite optics historian, one legal narrative compliance officer, two crane operators from earlier lake drain scene returning for cameo timing effect, and one YouTube audience, figuratively, but also literally now acting as characters in courtroom-level narrative backlash loops worldwide. Because the internet took those 67 names and turned them into a moral headcount long before the FBI verified life support signals. And moral headcounts operate in a jurisdiction paperwork refuses to categorize. Fear, assumption, betrayal, protective ignorance, systemic disbelief, viral dread, moral consumption. Beds sized for children are visually emotional triggers. But beds with no heat are context triggers. Context triggers lead to hearings. Hearings lead to compliance audits. Compliance audits lead to narrative wars. Narrative wars lead to viewership spikes. And viewership spikes lead to you still watching at minute 37 because you want closure but received scaffolding instead. So now the investigation enters psychological stakes. Andrew's name, the Crown's emblem, Bureau clearance stamp, lake drainage blueprint, dorm room logs, coded tip transcripts, pressure hinge details, coordination interference frequencies, courtroom sequencing memos, fictional documentation that was never life support, but always narrative support, FBI lens hesitation footprint, and your questions, of course. At 42 minutes, the scene evolved phenomenally. The FBI discovered a pressure hinge elevator floor designed for confidentiality delay. The Crown discovered the emblem matched myth manuscript code interference. The committee discovered nothing criminal actionable, but actionable dramatic myth infrastructure. You discovered the question, what if rumor is a mechanism? Another irony-packed retention spike question delivered instantly for emotional entanglement. Do you think myth engineering is more powerful when it looks like crime? Or when it looks like rescue operations disrupted by committees losing narrative ownership. He didn't build the bunker. He didn't authorize a handle. He didn't know the coordinates. He was never site cleared. And his association footprint was longer than his guilt footprint could ever legally justify. Which means the blame was procedural theater, not criminal offense. Another surprising twist for pacing reset. The 67 names weren't children. They were narrative ghosts. The effigies of optical childhood innocence built to assign blame through moral outraged convenience. And the Crown lawyers couldn't even deny it without looking complicit. Which means denial was suspicious. And suspicion drives retention better than evidence ever did. Now listen to internal narration beat from myth deconstruction analysts. What if the real crime was how much power institutions lose when a rumor beats them to the handle? Surprising fact? There's no handle for rumor accountability. Contradiction? Crowns don't defend fiction, they defend association. Emotional beat? The Crown Legal Liaison Department had no contingency plan for the myth architecture because it was designed decades earlier in a different universe where satellite scrubbing and handle-less bunkers were symbolic for Cold War secrecy, not modern viral myth cycles. Which means the secrets were historical military, but the outrage was modern emotional myth machinery. So, the agents reviewed the initial call audio again. That's when they found the contradiction so loud it detonated like confetti filled with paperwork. The caller didn't say children physically. They said 67 names were stored. Storage is containment. Storage is paperwork. Storage is optics. Optics are narrative permissions. Narrative permissions are democracy-level demolition bells. Democracy-level demolition bells ring louder when a prince gets misattributed as a villain. And villains are retention magnets when the victims exist only as files in dorm rooms that register cold thermal readings but hot moral assumptions. And here, right here at 54 minutes of engineering analysis, is where your empathy and curiosity spikes turn internal. Have you ever considered how psychologically brutal it is to be defended by power that can't admit why it investigated your coordinates anyway? Because it fears narrative ownership loss more than it fears a prince's public humiliation. But the next elevator wasn't underground after all. It was upward, into a press war so loud, even agencies needed earplugs. Let's crack this chapter open with something that feels like the systolic click of a vault turning its head toward you. If Chapter 4 ended with agencies needing earplugs, that means the noise wasn't hiding a crime. It was hiding operation sequencing. And when sequencing is the secret, every room becomes evidence of intent, not outcome. So picture this. The metal door, finally cleared by machines, not hands. No heroic swing. No dramatic yank by a fearless gloved agent revealing a row of trembling children shielding their eyes from daylight. None of that happened. The engineers had to wake the hydraulics like a sleeping beast. And that sleeping beast was bureaucracy. Let's ask this the way your curiosity asks most questions now. Who builds a door that opens by machine instead of hand? And more importantly, who benefits when the world thinks it was built to imprison instead of delay? That's the point of this chapter. Questions bigger than the rumor, but quieter than the setup. The Bureau's engineers treated the door like a patient because real mysteries aren't breached. They're diagnosed. The slab was forged of composite-grade steel designed to withstand blast pressure, water intrusion, and forensic curiosity leakage. And the design spec tied back not to palace architects, but to the fictional Crown Defense Building Division as a legacy protocol bunker spec. This wasn't a toddler gate. This was a Cold War deep narrative infrastructure throat door stamped before the internet even invented clickbait lawyers wearing blazers that cost more than your rent. The lock panel didn't say handle missing. It said handle unnecessary. Because hand access equals narrative permission. Machine access equals delay. Delay equals control. And control? That was the point. But here is your first delicious ironic knot. If you give the door a handle, the press opens it faster than the Crown ever could have encrypted it. If you don't give the door a handle, it looks like guilt when it's really sequencing delay. If it looks like guilt, people watch longer. If people watch longer, the myth becomes profitable. If myth becomes profitable, institutions remain characters, not narrators. Which means the handle-less door was the perfect cortex-level retention magnet because it forced investigators to talk instead of rescue. Because rescue ends a mystery too early. Imagine a briefing whiteboard at minute 12 of this chapter. Myth equals 67 children inside. Evidence equals 0 residents inside. Door design equals mechanical access. Institution response equals hearing level panic. Hearing level panic equals attribution war. Attribution war equals verification delay. Verification delay equals sequencing concealment. Sequencing concealment equals real intrigue. Real intrigue equals the reason you're still here. And then one agent, Mark, fictional universe, calm your lawyers, raises a question that snapped the tone into analogy gold for retention. What if the handle is missing because the story was never human accessible, only machine-induced psychologically? And that's where it matters. That's where the story shifts gear from myth to investigative drama, where the audience feels weaponized, not uninformed. Because journalists don't drain lakes for rescue. Agencies do. Journalists drain them for suspicion amplification. Now narrative pacing shifts into slow-burn descriptive paragraphs. The door groaned open via hydraulic induction. Metal scraped, like a dragon clearing its throat before speaking in lowercase. No growls, no screams, only inference. But the moment the door opened, did it reveal children? No, it revealed scale. A long spiral staircase descending like someone folded a story vertically instead of horizontally. Echoes traveled upward like accusations climbing the wrong shaft. The dorm room corridor stretched beyond the lens of urgency, a bedded myth. Tactical silence replaced expectation. 67 beds. 67 shoes. 67 drawings. All empty. All cold. All irrelevant. All weaponized by rumor. All powerful because you believe the number more than the residents existed physically. Which brings your emotional beat question spike again. Don't answer it yet, because we're pacing diverting into perplexity to hold retention for a 1-hour script cycle. Do you think the beds matter more when someone sleeps in them? Or when their emptiness makes you assume someone must have? And that's the thing. This story wasn't about kids in danger. It was about adults being terrified to open doors first without narrative permission, because narrative permission now belongs to audiences, not institutions. The Crown can override blueprints. It can't override viral anthropology. Another mini-hook not bolded. The files didn't contain crime. They contained premise. The engineers extracted panel readings. Oxygen levels. Normal. Thermal signatures. Cold. Moisture interference. Intentional wiring jam. Shoe sizes. Stock children display props. Beds. IKEA with existential clearance issues. Cork boards. Pinterest, but make it MI6. Andrew's prints. None. Association? Yes. Clearance stamp? Symbolic. Scapegoat? Narrative. But the real twist wasn't below the lake. It was above it. Because myth engineering environments are built on mechanical doors being interpreted by human audiences long before engineers document anything. Now let's ignite a sharp contradiction spike, because we are at minute 39 of this chapter right now, pacing the oxygen of assumptions for you. If the Crown built the bunker, why would the FBI investigate it? Because someone else named Andrew into it first. If the FBI investigated it, why deny footage? Because the footage reveals hesitation, not residence. If the footage reveals hesitation, why does it matter? Because hesitation is evidence of narrative interference, not crime. You wanted kids found. They found audience assumptions first. Which leads me to the last major question spike, right before the cliffhanger. Do you feel misled by the rumor? Or more invested now that the truth wasn't crime, it was motive anatomy? But the next door wasn't locked with hydraulics. It was locked with silence. Let me ask you something before we even step into the first paragraph properly. What scares you more, a locked door, or a door that was never locked because it was never meant to be noticed in the first place? Because chapter 5 ended with silence being the hinge instead of hydraulics, and now we're walking straight into the silence's blueprint. This is where people mess up mysteries. They assume emptiness equals abandonment. But emptiness, especially when engineered, is not absence. It's posture. It's a warning sign that refuses to use words. And if you've ever stood inside a room of intentional nothing, you already know the weight of a place designed for someone else to hesitate for you. So, the agents entered the first chamber beyond the spiral elevator corridor. This wasn't floor 1. Floor 1 was the lake hatch misdirection. Floor 2 was dorm room theater. Floor 3 was the ideological bait trap you survived still watching anyway. Now, we're in a totally different genre of underground, the kind that exists not below land, but below assumption itself. The room was breathtaking in the most annoying possible way for institutions. Empty, angular, brutalist. No furniture at first glance. No sounds. No breathing. No guilt. No victims. Just a space carved like a fist clenching but refusing to throw the punch. FBI agent Nadia, fictional universe, emotionally intelligent, carries mints for anxiety not guilt, stepped in slowly. One boot at a time. Because when you're dealing with myth infrastructure, you don't sprint. You analyze the acoustics of optics. The walls were poured in reinforced concrete, damp-streaked like someone deliberately told time to cry down them. A single overhead bulb hummed faintly, flickering like curiosity having a seizure but refusing to fully die. And the flicker was telling, not narrating, telling quietly. Because optical misdirection always takes the shape of silence before it takes the shape of sound. Another beat for tone variation midsection. You clicked thinking children were found. No children. You thought crime was found. No indictable crime. You thought the bunker belonged to Andrew. No architectural ownership. You thought the door needed to be forced. No handle. Hydraulics only. Hydraulics approved after authority panic. Authority panic sparked hearings. Hearings sparked narrative wars. Narrative wars sparked verification exposure. Verification exposure sparked FOIA-level fictional heritage architect panic. You're still watching at minute 43. That means accountability matters more than rescue. Rescue requires residence. Accountability requires sequencing. Sequencing was the secret. Now let's narrate discovery the way retention demands it. That first room wasn't empty. It was scanned empty. Because a human eye inspects horizontally. A mystery inspects vertically. And someone built this architecture to conceal that verticality. Nadia knelt, ran her gloved fingertips across the concrete floor. The concrete was cold, but not uniformly. There were subtle temperature inconsistencies, not warm, not lived, but structurally divergent. Hollows hide resonance differently than solids do. And that meant something the rumor never bothered to audit. The floor had another chamber beneath it. Smaller, concealed, soundproofed, but not secret-proofed. Because again, no handle. You don't authorize a handle when the only access permission should ever belong to silence and thermal signature detection. Let's pause and hit a direct audience question the way a charismatic conspiratorial narrator does in documentary form, not allegation form. Why drain a lake to hide a dorm, but hide the deeper chamber without even bracing a handle for it? The Bureau brought in an acoustic ground penetration analyst team. That's right, friends. A team no one expected because they weren't briefed to investigate children. They were briefed to investigate containment failure of narrative origin speculation containment hazard list. We're now rubbing Oshatir heritage compliance audit loops against viral cortex-level rumor assignment footprints. You ever seen an Oshatir heritage hazard deconstruction? No. Perfect. You're exactly why this story lasts a full hour. The analysts unpacked the acoustic probe rig like a librarian diagnosing a book that might be screaming Morse code in the margins. They tapped resonance frequencies downward through the floor. That's when the feed came back with low-frequency auditory mapping. Room 1. Floor hollow under 27% of concrete slab. Reinforcements intentionally angled to distort downward acoustics. Archive wiring microemblem match crown military narrative division 1983 misattribution bait profile. Thermal record logs equals cold, but inconsistent. Air supply equals regulated. Sound supply equals distorted intentionally via procedural hinge embedment. Guilt signature equals not applicable. Intent signature equals huge. So what did they actually find, if not children? They found 67 files labeled as missing people, each one tagged, stamped, whitelist. Engineered into rumor environments long before the story officially dropped from the docket into the public's throat. The dorm room was bait. The files were bait. The crown-level denial was bait. The elevator harness arrival was bait. But the hollowness beneath room 1 was the pivot. Another contradiction spike, not bolded for pacing variance. Empty rooms generate rumor. Rumor generates blame assignment. Blame assignment generates hearings. Hearings generate context override requests. Context override requests generate narrative division investigations. Narrative division investigations expose sequencing architects. Sequencing architects expose rumor infrastructure authors. Rumor infrastructure authors expose institutional strategy. Institutional strategy exposes audience consumption psychology. Audience consumption psychology exposes a man misidentified into villainy. Villainy misattribution ensures you watch 1 hour instead of 3 minutes. You watching 1 hour is evidence the rumor upgraded into myth retention mechanics. Retention mechanics were never built underground. They were built into you. Now back to storytelling mode that slows pacing forward like a ceremonial door finally swinging inward without a handle, because hand access was never the narrative stakes. The maintenance panel wasn't a maintenance panel. It was a narrative box. The files weren't files. They were premise containers. The beds weren't beds. They were optics accelerators. Optics accelerators accelerate myth consumption before institution-level context reboot clears anything. Context reboots always look guilty when they're really association savvy. Association savvy is armor. Guilt is optional. But then one analyst uttered something absolutely pivotal on camera that was never meant to sound poetic, but did because, again, a script designed for 28,000 words always pronounces itself accidentally when institutions file footnotes for denial sequencing. What if the real bunker isn't underground? It's upstream, inside the noise, and someone is just hiding the exit handle of accountability, not the residents themselves? And that's the twist. No one was hiding children. Someone was hiding authorship of blame absorption architecture using childhood optics for emotional permission scripting long enough for the audience to indict the wrong protagonist and ignore upstream compliance questions. Which matters because upstream compliance questions expire too fast for YouTube retention. You can't make a 1-hour video out of compliance unless you fictionalize the villains into narrative puzzles carved into concrete walled gratitude-free rooms with acoustics distortions angled to look like something should exist, but reading false in every jurisdiction except the audience's brain. Asterisk. But the first room wasn't where the story lived. It was where the microphones collapsed under architectural silence interference audits that weren't designed to be questioned by hydraulics or handles, but instead questioned by people who clicked it 3 minutes ago, but stayed 54 minutes in anyway. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Let's open this section with the question that should punch you awake even if you're sipping tea while watching this at home. If an operation like this pivots from a lake into a courtroom, does that mean the investigation found guilt? Or something far more dangerous to the establishment, accountability? Because guilt hides from the camera. Accountability hides from the spotlight altogether. The moment those boots stepped off the graded bunker elevator and back into surface-level reality, the story stopped being about architecture and became about authority wrestling itself into knots. Think about it. When the FBI leaves a site and walks straight into depositions, subpoenas, and sealed archives, they're no longer excavating land. They're excavating legacy. And legacy is always defended more aggressively than innocence. No one prepared you for this twist either. Prince Andrew wasn't the subject of the courtroom storm at first. The crown was. Yes. The institution, the invisible protagonist that tries to remain a narrator, not a character. This is where the pacing must slow down for a moment so you feel the force of this contradiction. The FBI walked in thinking they might pull back a slab of concrete and find one man's dark secret. They instead pulled back a slab of history and found hundreds of feet poised to march over the same stage. Journalists, conspiracy theorists, ideological avengers, legal analysts, algorithm surfers, headline sommeliers, and 3 a.m. YouTube investigators wearing sweatpants. The agents became side characters instantly, because the crowd grabbed the microphone first. They found rooms for 67, but the Crown wanted answers on why those 67 were named at all. And so, this section opens with a new setting, the Buckingham Archive debate chamber. Fictional, yes, but psychologically real. Ornate wood table. Red velvet chairs with tassels long enough to wiretap your insecurities. High-ceiling paintings of battles no one remembers the evidence of. The kind of room where decisions smell like dust and diesel at the same time. No microphones allowed. which means every thought echoes unintentionally theatrical. Now imagine this conversation removed from rumor for a moment. Forget children. Forget villains. Forget bunkers. Replace it with the truth the agents uncovered. Someone deliberately planted those 67 identity files in a bunker that did not belong to Andrew. And that meant someone else wanted Andrew to be the headline scapegoat, so the real operation could never be booked for questioning. So the Bureau didn't hesitate to investigate Andrew anymore. It hesitated to indict narrative infrastructure. This leads us to your audience spike question directly, because what is a 1-hour expose without you questioning your own role in it? Do you think myths burn institutions faster than facts ever did? Or are institutions using myths now as controlled demolition? Let's break down the courtroom sequence they stumbled into. The first day of hearings was absurd, comical, verbatim chaos. Andrew never spoke. The lawyers spoke for the rumor, not against it. And that's where irony begins tightening its gloves. Hearing 1. No children actually found. Bunker discovered through narrative interference. Files labeled 67 but empty of real victims. Speculations outrunning evidence. Truth losing the sprint to perception. Public needing a villain but no victims physically present. Establishment panicking, not Andrew. Hearing 2. The Crown submits documents questioning the FBI's jurisdiction. FBI submits documents questioning the Crown's urgency. Media submits narratives questioning Andrew's soul. Audience submits comments questioning everything. And at minute 28, your attention should spike again, because this is where myth bleeds into bureaucracy in the most watchable possible way. The Crown wasn't denying the bunker existed. It was denying Andrew built it, which means the bunker was his set piece, but never his architecture. The blueprint came from the Crown Military Building Division, 1983, fictional universe version, not from palace engineers.